in my mind, I said, okay, I only have like 4 more pushes in me. That's it. I like distinctly remember thinking 4 more is all I got. And I, pushed that fourth one. I was like, okay, I got 3 more. I'm like, she's got to come out in 3. I'm like, okay, that was the third one. Now I got 2 left. This baby has to come out. And I remember hearing my midwife too. She's like, Katrina, put your hand down. You'll feel her head. I'm like, oh, I know, I feel it. I didn't put my hand down. I was like, I feel exactly where it is. And I was like, I got one left, and I pushed her out on that one. So it's
Wow.
really like I feel like I spent 9 months manifesting like the most perfect birth at home, and I got it.
Hey, you're listening to Empowered Births at Home with me, Esmeralda, the home birth doula, as your host. I am a mama of 3, fellow home birther, and entrepreneur. I am completely obsessed with birth, more specifically, home birth. And this is a podcast where women share their empowering home birth stories, along with the journey that led them down the path to home birth. Whether you're currently pregnant, planning a home birth with your first or fourth baby, or even just someone who is a complete birth nerd like me, this is the podcast for you. So let's get into this week's empowering home birth story. We are on episode 32. We will be chatting with Katrina about her home birth story with her third baby. Let's go ahead and bring Krista on.
Hi, I am Katrina. I am 38. I got 3 kids who are 6, 3, and 1 years old. I'm honestly just like a regular person. I'm a retail store manager. My husband is a stay-at-home dad, and we homeschool all 3 kids. So none of them have ever been to daycare. So we're pretty busy, you could say. But I had my first 2 kids in the hospital and then did a complete 180 and decided to have my baby girl at home. And it was like, I don't know, it was the most transformative experience of my whole life. Like, it really just changed me
Yeah.
entirely,
Mm-hmm.
if that's possible.
Yeah.
Like, if I could go back, knowing what I know now, knowing what birth could be like, I would have had my boys at home as well because it was that empowering.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's so good to hear. From your 2 boys' hospital birth experiences, how were those like?
I mean, I think back then didn't I just didn't know. I didn't know a lot of things, and I kind of just rolled with it. So, you find out you're pregnant, you get an OB, and you do all the things that they advise you to do, and you don't really think too hard about it. And like the same thing for my second, I went to an OB, we did all the things, but now I really realize like the way their birth panned out is there was like a lot of trauma there that I didn't know was there because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what home birth or what natural birth could be like. And like there were so many interventions with my first 2, and I'm just like, oh, but I could have done it. I could have done it myself, and I could have done it my way, and I could have delivered my own baby like I did with my third. So I don't know. It's like at the time I didn't know it was traumatic, but now that I understand physiological birth, and now I realize it was really traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the case for a lot of people who don't realize it until much, much later.
Yeah, that's the case only because of how normalized it is to have a traumatic birth,
Mm,
that now it's not even seen as very traumatic. It's seen as, oh, well, that's how it normally goes. Like, that's what happens when you give birth. So it's not really seen as trauma anymore. It's
right.
just a normal event that people are like, oh, yeah, that happened to my friend or that happened to my sister. I know
Mm,
somebody who that happened to. So it's normal. And it doesn't seem like a big, huge, crazy thing if it happens to you anymore because of how normalized that is. But
Yeah,
once you get into the world of home birth and natural birth, you kind of see it from a different perspective and you're like, "Whoa, okay. That was really traumatic and it didn't have to be that way at all."
exactly. Like with my first, we induced at 38 weeks, and not because I was high risk, not because of anything, just because he was like too big. And then it just like went into a whole cascade of interventions that had to happen because we induced 2 weeks early before he was even ready, you
Mhm.
know? So we induced, and that was awful. And then, they break your water, they pump you full of Pitocin, then you have to have an epidural. And I like distinctly remember, we pushed him out. I didn't feel anything. We pushed him out. They put him on my chest. And I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, I should be crying. I should be crying right now. They think this is weird because I'm not emotional right now. But it was because I was so drugged up,
Yeah.
you know? And, the contrast to my third, I wouldn't say I was crying or emotional, but I was just like, I don't know, kind of like in shock of just how powerful I was, and like
Mhm.
I freaking did it.
Yeah.
And immediately feel like I felt way more connected to her right away than with my boys because of all the drugs that they pumped
Mhm.
into me. So, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. I understand. I get it. What was it that kind of led you down that path of learning about natural birth?
Honestly, I tell people this, and I don't want it to be, misconstrued in any way, but from people online, like
Mm,
stumbling on a couple people on Instagram, and they talked about a lot of other things that wasn't their niche, but then they snuck in little bits and pieces about home birth, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I wouldn't say I decided to have a home birth because of people online. That's what I like to joke about, but it really just pushed me to do my own research and educate myself. Like, I didn't understand so many things, and at the end of the day, I didn't understand, you know, how powerful I am. Like, I
Mhm.
was I was literally made to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why do we doubt ourselves so much? So I stumbled on a couple people, Madison Vining, who's super popular on Instagram, Allie Woods, Claudia with boys. Like those three people stand out in my mind because I was following them all at the same time, and all of them were just, putting in these little nuggets around home birth. And I was like, wow, that's, I don't know anybody in my life who's done that. And so I remember when we got pregnant, I told my husband, I'm doing this at home. And he's like, what? Like, what? And, I think it took him a while to really realize the value in it. But I think it was just so interesting to see, like, as we approached it, he's like, oh, okay. So, things like membrane membrane sweeps, that it's not actually proven to work. Cervical checks, that doesn't tell you anything. So why
Mhm.
why are people's arms all the way in there when they don't need to be? But also, the thing that I really liked, it was that we could be in our own home in like our space that's safe, that's comforting to us, So my husband can move around easily, takes away the anxiety for anybody who has anxiety because you're in your own comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I was like, what about our other two kids? My oldest was like coming and going from the room, checking on me, like it was so good. It was
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. That's awesome. Was there anything that you did differently to prepare for your last birth because it was home birth over what you did to prepare for your other two births?
I think, I mean, I obviously, my midwives gave me a long list of like supplies, like of things that are logistically necessary, but I just continued to do a lot of research. Like, during my pregnancy, I didn't do the glucose drink. I did, like, the prick your finger, glucose monitoring, and that felt much better. So I did the glucose test instead
Mhm.
of, like, the toxic drink. Like, I didn't know that thing was toxic, and you
Yeah.
just do it because 'cause you're told you should do it, right?
Mhm.
So, that was a big one. What else? No cervical checks and on no interventions whatsoever. Like, my due date was I forget what day it is now. It's
Mhm.
completely evading me, but here in Quebec, where I'm from, so I'm from Montreal, Quebec in Canada, and so our midwives unfortunately have to work very closely with our government, and so once you hit 41 weeks and 3 days, they have to send you to the hospital for monitoring. So you get, the heartbeat checked, you get ultrasound again, and if you get to 42 weeks, you have no choice but to get induced. And I was like, "No way. No way am I doing this again." But it was like getting down to crunch time, and there was a moment where I'm like, "Oh my god, they're gonna try to convince me to do all these things, and like, how am I gonna stand my ground?"
Mhm.
Especially if we get to 42 and they're forcing me to go to the hospital. And so I was running through all these scenarios in my mind, but I just looked at my husband, I said, "No, I'm not gonna make it to 42 weeks. Like, she is coming out before that." And I promise you, I was in the car, out of the hospital, out of that ultrasound, and I was like, "Today is the day. Today is the day you're coming out." And I went to labor on that day. After
Wow.
our little talk in the car. So yeah, I didn't do any sweeps or checks or anything
Mhm.
whatsoever. So that was very different than the last time,
Yeah.
obviously.
And so what was the first, like, sign that you got after leaving the hospital that day that labor was gonna start?
Nothing. Honestly,
No.
nothing until I was lying in bed.
Mm.
I think the day before too, like me and my husband, we went for a long walk and it was like tons of snow. We were trekking through. And I was trying to get things moving along. And so I didn't feel anything. And then lying in bed, 10 PM, I think our 5-year-old had snuck in by then. He always sneaks into our bed, so he was already snuck in, he was sleeping
Mhm.
beside me, and I was lying down, and I started to feel some stuff, and I was like, "Okay." Usually this happens, though, like, at night when you finally relax, you'll start to have, like, a contraction here, a contraction there, or, like, just cramping. So, it's like, "Okay, whatever. This is
Mhm.
probably nothing. This is probably nothing." And then it was like an hour later, I was like, "Oh, okay, this is something, it's happening. This is it." And I just kinda knew it. I wasn't like I don't know, it wasn't like my previous 2 births where I was induced and like, okay, like, this is happening. Like, there, it's very obvious, like, I'm being induced, now the baby's coming very soon. Whereas when you're trying to do it naturally, like, you have to figure it out, like, is this real or is this Braxton Hicks or,
Mhm.
like, how long is this gonna take? I just kinda knew. Is that weird? I don't know.
No. It's like our intuition will just kind of kick in and be like, "This is a little bit different. I can tell. This is different
Yeah,
than all the other times where I thought maybe," and it's just something in you is telling you that it's different this time.
yeah. And I even remember I, like, got out of bed, my husband was hanging out upstairs with, our brother-in-law, and I was like, "Hey, I think we're doing this tonight." And he's like, "Well, are you sure?" Like, "Oh my god, are you sure?" And I was like, "I think so. I'm gonna go lie down again with our son Brody and just, like, ride it out, see what goes on." And sure enough, I started timing, and I think around, like, 12:30, my water broke. And that's, like, first time my water has ever broken, which is
Yeah.
like a really fun and weird experience. Because normally if you're in the hospital, they're like, sticking that crochet hook in there, breaking it for you. And yeah, this is the first time I was like, "Oh, so that's what it's like." So at that point, I called my midwives. I called my midwives, and they were like, "Okay," like, this is what I appreciate about my midwives is that they want you to do as much as possible before they show up. They wanna show up kinda, like, right at the last minute. Especially she knew what kinda, birth I had envisioned in my mind, and so they showed up much later when I was, like, really starting to feel it, and when I was really, getting vocal.
Mhm.
So, that I appreciated as well, like, I was just at home, lying down, walking through it, chatting through it, making jokes,
Mhm.
moving freely through my room and through my house, so I loved it. I loved that part of the
Yeah.
early stages, and yeah, once the midwives told me, "Okay, we're on our way," my in-laws showed up at the same time, so we had to wake up my son because that's I was birthing on that bed, so I was like, "You gotta get back in your own room." So my mother-in-law took over with him, but he stayed awake. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. He stayed awake, unfortunately, until about 20 minutes before she came out. So
Oh.
he missed it by 20 minutes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, so my mother-in-law got him into his room. We, like, prepared the bed, prepared everything, and then, yeah, all the midwives showed up, so I feel like sometimes I wish I would've had a videographer. Like, if I was gonna do it again, I would for sure have one.
Yeah.
Because there's, like, parts that I feel like I'm missing because I was a little busy, I was a little preoccupied.
Mhm.
So if I had any advice to somebody who's thinking about having a home birth, pay the money, have somebody take photos and videos. All right, where are we? I think midwives showed up.
Yes.
I loved my midwives, can I tell you that? Like,
Mhm.
my midwife, Katrina, she works out of the birthing center that's, like, literally 8 minutes from our house, and I
Oh.
had a student midwife who was absolutely incredible. Like, I've had student nurses help me in a birth, and that was very unpleasant,
Mhm.
but a student midwife, wow, she was absolutely incredible.
Mhm.
And, like, too, if we wanna compare hospital birth versus home birth, like, they really cheer you on.
Mhm.
Like, I don't remember anybody cheering me on at the hospital either times. But they, like, really, offer suggestions of like, "Okay, try this position. That doesn't feel good. I can tell. Change this." Like, "Try this position. No, you don't like this. Try this position." Or, "Oh, do you wanna try acupressure?"
Mm.
So she was doing some acupressure on me at the same time. She was throwing combs at me. Um, but yeah, I distinctly remember, we were getting close to the ring of fire. We were getting real close to the ring of fire. And I remember hearing, so in Quebec, we have our midwives and we have something called an aide natal. And I had two aide natals who were there. So that they basically help out the midwives. They jump in, they like help clean up anything that needs to get cleaned up. They're wiping things up, just making sure everything is super smooth. And
Mhm.
I distinctly remember the 2 that I had in the corner, like, "Katrina, you could do it, like, you're almost there, keep going," like, imagine just, like, 4 cheerleaders there for you, that are completely hands off
Mhm.
and that are just cheering you on. I think that is, like, something beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like in the hospital, the only thing that they say to you during that time is like, push, push, push. And they're kind of like yelling at you.
Yeah,
And that's completely different from like the midwives who usually are telling you, like, oh, you can do it. You're so close. You're
yeah,
almost there. Like they say such encouraging words to you. And I was just at a hospital birth because it was for my family member, and that's, like, the only time I'll go to hospital births as, like, a doulist for
yeah,
family, And yeah, it was just like they were all surrounding her, telling her like, "Push, push, push, push," and I'm like, you can do it. You got this." I'm like trying to
Yeah.
be encouraging because they're all just yelling at her to push. So I'm like, it's so different at home births because either they're telling you such encouraging things or it's completely silent and they're just letting you do your thing. Like
Yeah.
you already know you got this, so nobody needs to say anything. So it's like either one of those, but it's not
Mhm.
people yelling in your face telling you to push and push
Yeah.
harder or like telling you that you're doing it wrong because you had an epidural so you can't even feel it. So you're feeling
Right?
discouraged. So yeah,
Right?
it's
Yeah.
completely different.
And it's funny that you say that. Like, so with my second child, we're in the hospital and I had that student nurse and the nurse does most of, she does all the monitoring, she does all the checks, she does most of the things until it's time for baby to like really come out. That's when they
Mhm.
call in the actual OB. And I distinctly remember, I'll never forget this. Okay. So I am pushing, I'm like pushing really hard. And the OB has got her hand on her knee like this, like hand on on her cheek here, staring like this, like completely unimpressed. She's like
Yeah.
staring directly into my junk and just so unimpressed. And
Wow.
I'm like working my buns off here, right? I've got an
Mhm.
epidural, I can't feel anything, and I'm trying to push out an 8-pound baby. And the nurse looks at her and is like, I'm so sorry, I called you 5 minutes too early. So she leaves and comes back 5 minutes later.
Wow.
Yeah. And then five
That's
minutes later, I do my pushing, she catches it, catches him, sorry, not it, catches him, pops him on me, and then is just like gone. Like
Mhm.
so impersonal,
Yeah.
you know? I think that part as well made such an impact on me of like, that's not magical. This is supposed to be
Mhm.
magical.
Yeah.
Isn't it? That's what we're told. This is supposed
Mhm.
to be magical and life changing. And she's, you know, staring at my stuff. Oh, you called me too soon. I'm coming back. Like what did she do during those 5 minutes?
Yeah, right.
Right?
She went to go take a seat.
Yeah. She's probably like in the other room on her phone, grabbed a sip of drink and like came back. Like,
Mhm.
or she could have stayed in the room for 5 minutes
Mhm.
and encouraged me,
Yeah.
right? Such a contrast, like such an
Mhm.
absolute contrast. And like I love that you said, yeah, usually it's like very quiet. And I remember that. Like it was super quiet. They were letting me do my thing. Every now and again I'd feel them. I forget what I was wearing. I think I was like wearing like a one-piece pajama thing. That looks like a
Mhm.
dress. And
Yeah.
obviously my underwears are gone. So I'd feel them like lift it up, check out a few things, keep moving. And it was just very quiet.
Mhm.
And two, my midwife was like, she's like, "Do you feel like pushing?" And I remember at that stage, I was like, I don't think so. I'm like, how will I know that? She's like, oh, you'll know. Right. And so, my midwife had two home births. So she's like, well, obviously you'll know. But when
Mhm.
you've had two epidurals, you don't know. You're waiting for somebody to tell you it's time.
Mhm.
But yeah, sure enough, you just know. Your body just knows. And that's like the other fascinating part, I think, is like when nobody's getting involved, your body just knows what to do.
Yeah.
I think that's super fascinating.
Mhm.
There was definitely a moment where I had these crazy thoughts going through my mind. And I can't remember who it is. I want to say it was Allie Woods. And she was like, when you're screaming and you're having these moments where you're like, what was I thinking? Why did I choose this? Like, what is the matter with me? Like, I must be crazy. When you have those feelings, you're like 5 minutes away from meeting your baby.
Yeah.
I, like, thought about that while I was in labor, while I was having those crazy thoughts. I was like, "Oh, okay, this is serious." I was like, "This is serious stuff now." There's, like, no break between contractions. I think at that point, it was, like, every I think I maybe had, like, a 10-second break between each contraction. I
Mhm.
was, "Oh, I don't even have a second to, like, breathe between them."
Yeah.
So, "Oh, okay. I'm regretting this. Oh my god, why did I choose this? I'm the only person I know who's ever done a home birth, like, I'm absolutely nuts." And then I thought about what she said, and I
Mhm.
was like, "This must be how close you are to meeting her."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, that's it. This is how close we are."
Mm.
And I was really crushing my husband's arms by that point, his
Yep.
forearm. And in my mind, I said, "Okay, I only have, like, 4 more pushes in me. That's it." I, like, distinctly remember thinking, "4 more is all I got." And I, pushed that 4th one. I was like, "Okay, I got 3 more." I'm like, "She's gotta come out in 3." I'm like, "Okay, that was the 3rd one now. I got 2 left. This baby has to come out." And I remember hearing my midwife too, she's like, "Katrina, put your hand down, you'll feel her head." I'm like, "Oh, I know, I feel it." Uh, I didn't put my hand down. I was like, "I feel exactly where it is." And I was like, "I got 1 left," and I pushed her out on that one. So, it's
Wow.
funny, like, I feel like I spent 9 months manifesting, like, the most perfect birth at home, and I got it.
Mhm.
And in those moments when I was laboring and I was like, "Okay, this is all I have left. We have to get her out in 4 pushes," and I did that, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. And then, yeah, boom, there she was.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's been a year and a half later, and I feel like I'm still riding the oxytocin high. I'm sure that's done, and this is just, like, the aftermath of what home birth can do for you, but, like,
Yeah.
sometimes I still feel like I'm on cloud 9
Mhm.
a year and a half later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's amazing. I really love hearing that part of you saying that you were like, I have 4 more pushes left. I have 3 more. I have 2 more. Because it really shows just how strong and powerful women are.
Mhm.
Even when we think we have no more strength in us, we still are able to kind of still muster up more strength inside of us somewhere to be able to birth our baby. And it's like, if that doesn't prove that we were made to do it, what does?
Right?
Because we really do just have so much strength inside of us and power. And it's just so sad that not a lot of people believe in that anymore. But
Yeah,
hearing like, I can only do this 4 more times, but really you went on to keep doing it, what, like 5, 6 more times afterwards, and you thought you only had the 4, but really you just had so much more, and if it would have taken longer, you would have found the strength to keep going on longer.
yeah.
So, yeah, I really like that part of your story. That was awesome.
And you know what I would say too is, like, I really don't know anybody in real life who's had their baby at home.
Mhm,
I know 2 people who have tried and, for whatever reason, they had to be transferred to the hospital. But, like, I'm the only person I know in my circle who's done it, and that's scary. Like,
mhm,
I relied on a lot of people like yourself who share their stories online and urge us to educate ourselves and look at, what could birth really be like? Like,
mhm,
does it have to be like that?
mhm.
You know? Because I feel like after my boys too, like once I had them, I was just like in a total daze. I was just
Yeah.
out of it for months. And like
Mhm,
after I had Ruby, who's our little girl, like it was just like, boom, I'm ready. I'm ready for action. you
Mhm.
know? Obviously, I rusted, but it wasn't like my mind was in a fog for months afterwards.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think that too is by design, right? Like,
Mhm.
when you have your baby naturally and you do ride that oxytocin high, like, that's on purpose, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's almost like the adrenaline rush that you get after, like, you get hurt or something like that. It's meant on purpose for us to be able to either, like, ask for help or say that something happened, and then, then it kicks in if you were hurt and maybe you, like, faint or whatever, and people can help you. But it's the same thing where it's like that oxytocin rush is there to help you afterwards because you just went through something that took a lot of strength out of you and you're like exhausted afterwards
Yeah.
too. But now you have all of this oxytocin in your body that's like helping you go through the postpartum of, okay, I have to take care of this baby now. I have to breastfeed the baby. I have to do all
Mhm.
this stuff with the baby. So it's like meant on purpose to do that.
Yeah. And true, like, that that is all by design, right? Like, why would people keep having babies without that? Like,
Mhm,
I'm telling you, probably like, I never had that feeling, like, immediately after I had her, I was like, "I could keep going. I could keep having way more babies," because it was
mhm.
that incredible of an experience,
Yeah.
and that's also by design, right? Like,
Mhm.
natural birth wouldn't be addictive. Like, it needs to be addictive, otherwise we wouldn't keep procreating.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so funny. Is there anything you want to touch on in the postpartum? Like, how did that go right after she was born, the golden hour and all of that?
Oh my gosh, it was so good, it was so relaxed, like, she never left me. This is definitely something they don't do in the hospital. In the hospital, they give you, like, delayed cord clamping.
Mhm.
It's not like this. Like, at home, we let it go completely white.
Yeah.
And that is so, so crucial. I wish I could have done that with my boys, but you live and you learn, right? But just the whole, like, environment was different after I gave birth. Like, it was very relaxed. She never left me. She was lying on top of me the whole time. When it came time to, patch me up, I had a little bit of a tear just on the same spot I with my first, I had an episiotomy, so
Mhm.
guess where I'm tearing on the same spot.
Yep.
So when they had to patch me up, my husband got her, and they urged me to take a shower right away, which they don't let you do in the hospital. They just like leave you in the bed filthy and like traumatized. So yeah, I took a shower right away. Second I was back in bed, she was back on me, and it was beautiful. Like, you're just bonding right away. You get skin to skin right away. And I think this time, I don't know, maybe because I felt way more connected to her, she was on me a lot.
Mhm.
Like, as much as I could have her on me, she was on me.
Mhm.
As much as I can do with 2 other kids, or 5 other. So, I'd say that was very different
Mhm.
as well.
How was the breastfeeding experience right after? Was it any different from with like your boys, or how did that go?
You know what? So, with my first, because they took him out 2 weeks early, he had jaundice, and then when we started breastfeeding, it was an absolute nightmare,
Mhm.
and they were like, I think we were in the hospital for a total of about 3 days, and so I probably had about 8 different nurses, like, coming in the room, squeezing, giving your tips, and by the time I left, like, my nipples were destroyed,
Yeah.
and, everybody says, like, "Okay, get a lactation consultant." I'm like, "Wasn't weren't the 8 nurses who came in my room, like, consulting? And now I'm left destroyed. My baby's starving, and I can't feed him." And
Mhm.
so, with him, we supplemented. formula, and with my second, I honestly, like, was still in, like, the old version of me that was, like, very much hospital birth, and this is all how it goes, and we just
Mhm.
formula fed him from the beginning,
Mm.
and with Ruby, I, like, made it the most days I've ever been able to make it,
Wow.
and so eventually we did supplement, but, like, I never made it that long,
Mhm.
and I think part of that was, like, again, educating myself, really having a different environment too, like, your once you give birth, your midwife comes back to your own house for, like, the next 3, 5 days, I can't remember now,
Mhm.
but she came back every single day, she would give tips, give encouragement as well, and it was just, like, a whole different level of, like, specialization. I don't even know how to describe it, like, when the nurses, they have good intentions, but, like, this is a whole other level of care, and that is
Yeah.
what I cannot, like, stress enough. Like, if you are looking for a great birth, a great experience, every OB I've had in my experience just, like, doesn't even compare to the midwives that I had.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like the nurses who do come in to try to help you, they're not sometimes you will get like a lactation consultant, but a lot of time it is just a nurse and they don't get all of that education that a lactation consultant would get. They just get like a very small portion of that. And so when they come in, they're bringing in that small portion of what they know and thinking that they know everything almost.
Mm,
And so they kind of are pushing all this stuff on you that sometimes isn't even really helping you. And a lactation consultant would be able to see that and tell you like what's going wrong or what we can fix. But they're just taking on these little things that they've learned and being like, this is what you need to do. And they keep doing it over and over and over again. And that's probably why you felt like you were destroyed after the 3 days because
mm,
they kept doing the same thing over and over and it probably wasn't working for you.
yeah,
And so a lactation consultant would have been able to see that, but the nurses can't. And so a lot of people don't know that that's kind of a big indicator of whether your breastfeeding will go successful or not is
yeah,
if like you're not getting the right help at the very beginning.
yeah.
And that really just hurts it if you're not getting that proper help. So it's
Mm.
unfortunate that they don't have like a real lactation consultant coming in right afterwards.
Yeah, especially if it's your first time or not even if you've just been unsuccessful in the past. Like my midwife, she was so helpful in just like giving me different positions. And she's like, okay, I can see why this is painful for you. Like this is the way her mouth needs to be. This is the way her throat needs to be. Um, and really showing positions that would keep me relaxed
Mhm.
so that baby can relax, and
Yeah.
a all the while this is happening, I have my other 2 kids in the room hanging out, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to hear that you did have a way better experience with your third and breastfeeding, that you were able to actually do it for a longer amount of time. And I think it does also have to do with the interventions that you had said that you got in the hospital. A
Mhm,
lot of those can also kind of not make breastfeeding as successful as it should be because you have all of those things in your system, Pitocin, epidural, whatever else they pumped in you. And so it kind of holds back your body from actually releasing the hormones that it needs to bring that breast milk to actually come in the right way as it's supposed to. So with your third, you didn't have any of those Pitocin, epidural, anything else pumped into you. So your body's hormones was doing everything that it actually needed to afterwards. And like we talked about, that oxytocin high, that too also helps the breast milk production. So it's
right.
like all of that is just the perfect environment for you to successfully breastfeed. And that's something not a lot of people think of with even just the difference of hospital and home birth, they think it has to do all about the birth. They're just like,
Mhm.
"Oh, you're having two different kind of births, and that's the only difference." But really, even the whole postpartum can be different too with things like breastfeeding because you are just setting yourself up for success with a home birth, whereas the hospital system isn't really set up that way. You're kind of set up to fail, even
Mhm.
though they might not mean it to be set up that way. That is unfortunately how the system is set up, and it's not there for you to thrive really.
Yeah. And I love that you said that because when I first got pregnant, I was on the waiting list for the midwife. And so I was seeing an OB for, I don't know, I think I did 3 visits.
Mhm.
And by the end of those 3 visits, I was like, "Oh my goodness, I need to see this midwife." Like, it has just further validated just how vastly different our perspectives are on what birth can be, you know? Not the doctor's fault, she went to allopathic medical school, so she's just doing what she knows. I'm sure she's a great OB to a lot of people, but it was just so obvious, like, "Okay, thanks for this 15-minute visit. I mean, you don't know me, you don't know what matters to me, you don't really care." Versus an hour with my midwife, getting to know them, getting to they really knew what I wanted, and they really cared, and they were really trying to make it happen for me, right?
Yeah.
Just the standard of care leaps and bounds ahead of everything I've ever experienced with an OB.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Just hearing everything that you shared with us today. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. If anyone wants to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm Katrina K. Patry, and come say hi.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go ahead and leave the link below so anyone who wants to connect with you can find you there. And just again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks. So much fun.
Wow, what a great story we heard from Krista. And just so much information came out of this episode. We had such great chats and just little talks about so many different things that can be so helpful for any of you who are planning a home birth at this time. So I really appreciate Krista for coming on and sharing all of that with us and bringing along all of these conversations that we had and all of the great conversations that came along with her story. If you are currently planning and preparing for a home birth, then I'd love to share with you more information about the Empowered Home Birth course. This is a home birth based birth course, and inside this 8-week program, you will receive educational videos and weekly emails filled with additional resources for you to prepare for your empowering home birth. Once you purchase the course, you also get perks such as access to my entire resource library and private community chats. To enroll, click the link in the show notes and get started on the journey to your empowered home birth. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share with any family or friends who may benefit from these empowering stories. Also, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and review to help others who are searching for this information find this podcast. I'll see you next week for another empowering home birth story.